Welcome to Mumbai.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
Welcome to
exciting to be here.
MAMI. It's our 20th year, and we are so thrilled to have you here. So,
The honor is mine. It's really very excited.
I want to begin by congratulating you on Sacred Games. I remember when we met in June, we talked about, of course, the show, but you had talked about how to create cinema infused television.
I made up that word, I think.
But I got it when I saw this, and it was I think, and you'll all agree with me that that was such a game changer for television in India. Did you expect it to be that big and to be such a sort of cultural, touch point?
It was hard to say because we're relatively new in India. So I think but I thought that we could be more impactful if we were doing something that hasn't been done before versus another version of something that's readily available. There's a lot of entertainment options in India. So how do you stand out from the crowd? And it's by kind of watch. I find, but it was a kind of watching the culture that is so in love with film and television as well. But the idea of taking some of the production value of great cinema and infusing it into television to tell these great stories in a way that people haven't seen before. So I was hoping that that was the bet, that we would be better than just being a different outlet for the same thing.
So right now, I read that Netflix is investing more into original content in India than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, it's been a very strong push. So we sometimes we wait, several years before we do an original production in any given country. And when we came into India right away, so we have 10 original shows in production right now, 6 original films, all coming up for 19, and more to come. And I think our investment has been more not just in our original product, but even our license, our curated library is 2 times as bigger than it was since we launched. So it's been a very aggressive push into India. It's a vote of confidence that we could do well here.
So why the vote of confidence? What do you see happening here in the next 5 years?
Well, it's one of the most exciting places in the world in terms of the vibrancy of the market, the youth of the market, the adoption of internet for viewing choices. There's like 250 million people watching content in different forms on the internet in India, which is an incredible opportunity I look at. And I think it shows you that people are hungry for great stories and have a very big appetite for great stories. And this is a incredible storytelling culture. So the idea that we can do what we've done around the world in India is kind of that's what gives us the confidence to be out so much further ahead of it than we were in other countries. And I think that's interesting too, that the youth of this country is excited about different opportunities, and no one's kind of stuck in their ways as much as they often are in other countries. So that's why I think it's been such a vibrant market.
Is there anything that you can share with us about what the famous Netflix algorithm reveals about Indians? What do we want to watch? How are we different?
Well, I always try to focus on some of the sameness of the markets versus how we make some of the differences. But one thing that's great is that it probably won't surprise you at all that movie watching is very important to Indians. As much as they like to watch a lot of television, everybody in the country loves movies. So local movies, international movies. So I just feel like there's a very distinct difference between TV watching and movie watching. And that is unique in India to us relatively around the world, where it's always about 70% TV, 30% movies. I believe the appetite here is much more evenly split between TV and movies than anywhere else in the world.
What's the difference between TV and movies?
Well, I hope eventually very little. But right now, I think it's just the art of compression. I think is just telling a big story in a short amount of time, or a big story over a long period of time. I think of Sacred Games in many ways as a long movie, and it's one that will continue. And a lot of it is, a lot of the distinction between TV and movies have been about production value and dollars per minute, that get invested into it. And I think when you start seeing that more on things like Sacred Games, the lines start to get a little blurry. Not to that we don't, but I would totally respect the art of cinema and the art of filmmaking as a unique and different art than the art of television. But increasingly, they're starting to get closer and closer creatively.
Ted, is there anything that drives you crazy about this country?
Well, I never figure out the right amount of time to get from place to place. Other than that, it's just all exciting.
But does Netflix face any unique challenges being here?
It's mostly just unique opportunity. I think, like I said, at the time when we get into any given country, broadband infrastructure, internet infrastructures are built out to all different levels. So internet speeds are different. What people expect, and right away, our big push in India was to make sure this product works very well everywhere in the country, no matter how fast your connection is, that you can watch, that's why I think one of the reasons we invested in downloading, which we really weren't doing prior to our launch in India, for the rest of the world too, which was to take advantage of the opportunity that people had of the way that they watch in India, which is they're much more likely to download and watch it when they may not have a good connection or on the local trains, and so that we're able to give that incredible viewing experience regardless of your connectivity across the board. And so I think that's one of the things it was a unique driver for us in how people lived in India with the internet. And one of the big challenges I think over time will be how fast does that become the norm, that people come to expect the internet to be very dependable, always available, and in that way it's very different. I think people's lifestyle changes around that. So we saw that when we launched in the Nordics, where the internet is fast and cheap, and they're born with an iPad in their hand, that they expect, that Netflix wasn't such a novelty. They expect the internet to be great at everything. So, and I think it's different, depending on where you are in the world, that expectation is different.
I read this piece in, I think it was CNBC.com, where they had Mike Ovitz, who used to be one of the most powerful agents in Hollywood, saying that Ted Sarandos is almost more powerful than anyone in history.
He meant in the movie business, maybe.
So I was like, okay, like more than Napoleon, the American president. What does this mean?
That was a very big statement. I did read that too. I saw him recently, and he doubled down on that. I don't know why he keeps saying that.
How does that make you feel, Ted? And what do you want to do with this power?
Well, he was, by the way, talking about the entertainment business only.
But even that's very big in the entertainment business in history.
I would. I'll leave that to him. I'll leave that to Mike to say. What I want to do is basically enable storytelling around the world. Being able. One of the things that's been so exciting about Sacred Games is being able to take, and it's a great example, I think, of storytelling from anywhere to everywhere. And historically, just because of distribution history, that different countries have different access to a certain kind of programming or a certain kind of film or a certain kind of television, and they don't get to see great things from around the world just because there's never been a market for it. And because we use the internet to distribute, all of the physical barriers to distribution go away, and we can use technology to bring people closer to storytelling by great dubbing and subtitling, day and date distribution, so everyone can watch the same thing around the world at the same time. And it's just as likely that somebody in America loves Stranger Things as it is for someone in India to love Sacred Games, and vice versa. And that's a very new and exciting time in the history of television and film. And when we think about where this can cross, it's not like you have to get rid of all the conventional thinking about things. So typically people say, this country is a subtitled market. They like everything subtitled. When you have this many people, it's a crazy thing to say that these people like anything. The same thing around dubbing. You can't go to Germany as a dub market. They have to dub everything in German. And it turns out when you give options, so we subtitle and dub everything, and people watch pretty evenly everywhere in the world. Some people like to watch the subtitles. They're used to it. They want to hear the voice of the actor that they know in their head. And other places, they just love the dub. They love dubs because they've always watched dubs. So you have to get rid of all the conventional wisdoms about what does travel, what doesn't travel, how things have to get delivered, and just focus on story.
And that's what you want to do.
Absolutely.
But Ted, what's it like to be you? Do you get accosted in like public places? Are people pitching to you all the time?
Yes, that does happen a lot. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing because you don't know where the next thing's coming from. You don't know where the next thing is coming from.
Do you listen?
What's that?
Do you listen when people...
I do. I know sometimes it's...
Folks?
But sometimes it's not as convenient. It's less convenient than others.
Right.
But I think somebody probably give people very bad information, and they're like, whenever you get the opportunity, just pounce on them, and that's really not good advice. I say that very self-serving, but the truth of it is sometimes it's people will in Los Angeles every one who works anywhere is also writing a screenplay, and they will be very quick to tell you about it. But I think it's important sometimes that to use some of the things that are traditional that really work. The agencies become great filters, and they could really know what everyone's looking for, so that you're not just like bombarding somebody with an idea that doesn't fit our format or our company or our business. They may be able to tell you it's not good for Netflix, but it's great for so-and-so or great for somebody else. So that's a good one. But in general, I think that idea of just pounding up people, I think a good thing is a very professionally worded cover letter, an actual old school letter stands out a lot. When you get, I get more than 1,000 emails a day. So when somebody is reaching out on a cold calling on an email, and get upset that I'm not able to respond, it's not very practical. But actually, an old school letter stands out better than anything. So if I can get 1,000, hate emails and get 2 handwritten fan mail, but I notice them more than the other. Yeah.
Okay, you heard him. But what's the strangest place you've been pitched a story?
Well, one year I was flying to the Cannes Film Festival from New York, and I was tired, and I get on the plane, and I have a mask on to sleep, and I pulled the mask off, I opened my eyes, and someone is standing right over my head. And I don't know how long they were standing there, so but their timing was perfect, or they had been standing over me for 7 hours. I'm not sure which. That one I got a pitch one time when I was getting my hair cut. That actually happens almost every time I get my hair cut in LA. But it happens a lot. And you just, again, you never know where the next great thing's going to come from. So you listen.
So, Ted, walk us through what happens when a pitch comes to you or to Eric Barmack or to any of the other content people.
Yeah, I should point out, Eric Barmack, who does our international originals production, has a great team of people. Eric works for me. I have Cindy Holland, who does our other television around, predominantly English speaking from the U.S. Cindy Holland would run that. And we have Scott Stuber, who runs our film initiative. And we have Bella Bajaria, who she runs our co-productions and unscripted group. And Amy Reinhardt, who does our licensing around the world, and Rob Roy, who does it for Asia. So my direct team is really fantastic, and they are fully empowered to make decisions. The only way that we can move as fast as we are and adding as much new programming as we do is my team has my complete trust, and they can pull the trigger on anything. And they could say yes, and they could say no, and it sticks. And they have full power, even at very big budgets, to say yes. And I find that is, if my role moved from, at the very beginning of Netflix, I've been almost 18 years, and my job at the beginning was picking everything that was on Netflix. And then it became picking the people who pick the things that's on Netflix, and then it became picking the people who pick the people who pick the things that's on Netflix. So it's just a kind of an evolution of picking. And if I pick the right people, we're great, because they'll make great choices. And sometimes it's the story, sometimes it's the storyteller who they're betting on. And if they're winning more than they're losing, then we can keep moving fast. We learn from mistakes and move on. So someone like Eric probably has more green light authority than the head of most studios in the world. So that's a pretty exciting thing. So that's the only way that we're able to do what we do, really, is to have this great team that I have.
Well, what's incredible is last year, guys, Eric was here, and I did a talk with him, and he actually gave his email. He announced his email in the room. And Ted's planning to do the same thing in case any of you have any ideas of how to reach them.
Meaning I'm going to give you Eric's email today. Yeah.
But Ted, what happens once that email comes? Like, what is the trajectory, and how does an email become a show or a film?
It's pretty rare that it just would be a cold call email, but occasionally someone will send. What the best thing to do is if you have a fully fleshed out idea, especially if you're someone who is unknown in the business. So an actual script, a package that's kind of like who is going to make this, who is going to be in it. Ideally, a Bible or something that would tell you if this is a show. How many seasons is it meant for creatively, and how are you going to get from point A to point B, and what's season 1, and what's the season 2 and the season 3 arc. So the more complete, the better. And that the idea that giving us a better idea of what the material is based on. So our first set of Indian originals are heavily based on books, mostly because there's great Indian books, and it's not unusual. Our first, House of Cards and Orange Is the New Black were based on books as well. So what is it? Is it based on known IP already? That's always a helpful thing, just because it gives us some idea of does this story work in the country, and then we could also see did that book sell around the world. We did a show, 13 Reasons Why, last year that was very popular all over the world. But one of the reasons that we knew to do it was the success of the book all over the world and how many languages it was published in. So.
We're also very excited that you're going to be introducing Roma, which I think everyone in this hall and the hundreds of people outside waiting to see that film, which is of course also seen as Netflix's big bet for the Oscars.
Yeah.
I read this piece in the Washington Post where they quoted an agent saying that this is the big one, and if Roma doesn't win, Netflix can never win. What is your sense of that?
I'm very excited about the film, and we premiered at the Venice Film Festival, and then Telluride, and the Toronto Film Festival, the New York Film Festival, and luckily here we are. So you're part of a very prestigious group of folks who got to get early access to Roma, and the reaction to the film is phenomenal everywhere. And I think people see it, they realize it's a very universal story. It's not conventional film from the U.S. for sure. It's a show set in 1970s Mexico in Spanish in black and white. It's a very personal film of Alfonso telling the story of his family growing up, and the attraction to it was it's so masterfully made. This room, I believe you'll see it in, is the Dolby Atmos room. The sound design, I've never, as a distributor and as an executive, I've never really spent that much time understanding sound design for non-special effects movies. The sound design in this movie is off the charts, and you really see it in its glory with this Atmos room. Everywhere we've screened it, you see people looking over their shoulder because they think someone's laughing behind them or seeing. It's a very immersive experience. So I'm thrilled that it's here at the festival. And I don't know if that's a true statement, that if we don't get this, then it's never going to happen. I think film festivals, I think the Academy Awards are meant to celebrate the art, not the distribution. And if you have the best film, you win. And if you continue to have the best film and not win, then that thing becomes less significant. That Oscar or that film festival becomes less significant if it's mostly judged around something that consumers and film lovers really don't care much about, distribution. So no one goes to dinner after they see a great movie and talk about how it was distributed. They talk, right? So.
But Ted, you're talking about the sound design. You're talking about people turning around in theaters. But then people are also going to be able to see this film on their phones.
Yes,
Isn't
absolutely.
that a contradiction?
No way. Look, I think that there's no question the best way to see the Mona Lisa is at the Louvre. It's perfectly lit. It's positioned in a way that the light catches everything just right. There's nothing like it. But thank goodness we can still see the Mona Lisa online or in books or other ways to see it. But they're not like one's better than the other. They're just completely different experiences. And for some people, most people in the world don't live anywhere near a movie theater. So that this is not like they're going to do this instead of that. They're going to get the opportunity to do the same thing all over the world at the same time. And it's going to be different depending on your broadband connection, how fast it is, what size screen you're going to watch it on. Everyone's going to have a little bit of a different physical experience, but the emotional experience is going to be exactly the same.
But the general sense is that the Netflix films division hasn't been, the films that Netflix has created and that have been Netflix originals haven't had the same sort of impact as the shows. Would you agree with that?
Probably just not as quickly. So I think we've been at the film business, the television series business, for about 6 years. We've had documentaries in competition for the Academy Award now, and one last year, but for the last 6 years. And then our scripted film group has really been only at this meaningfully for 2 years. So it's pretty new. And so to be as impactful as the TV business has been, it would be a miracle to do it in 2 years. But I think this year, that group is really coming to their own. Last year with Mudbound, breaking through at the Oscars with 4 nominations, but more importantly, watched by tens of millions of people around the world. This year, obviously, at this festival, we have Buster Scruggs as well. And this is a Coen Brothers movie that they were trying to get made for 20 years, and they've been between every movie they were writing these short stories about the American West. So that's the fun part about this festival and our presence in the festival. Two very Indian films, one very Mexican film, and one extremely American film, a Western. You know, you don't get more American than that, and it represents what they're trying to do around the world. But also, we just released 22 July, Paul Greengrass's new film that's getting incredible response around the world. Pretty soon we have Bird Box with Sandra Bullock coming up that Suzanne Bier directed. That is a really, but on top, it's a beautifully crafted film, but it's also like an edge of your seat, thrill ride too. So what they're doing is working across multiple genres, multiple countries to bring the best films to the world the same way that they've been able to with the series. But we're just a few years behind.
Ted, you're on the board of the Tribeca Film Festival and the Los Angeles Film Festival. What do you think is the relevance of film festivals in a time when the iPhone is, carrying hundreds of hours of entertainment?
I think some of it's generational. I think film festivals are like I said, a celebration of the art, and it's great the community to come together and celebrate a film. This is a great way. People talk about theatrical, why don't your movies play in theaters? They're playing in the best theaters in the world in these festivals all over the world before they come to Netflix, and it's a great way to get kind of early access and to make the festivals even more relevant. By having people get out and talking about the films. The people who are willing sometimes to travel, who are willing to... I talked to someone yesterday who said they're taking all of this whole week off just so they can watch every movie at this festival, which is amazing. So that's who we want. Those are the people you want to give the first crack at a movie like this so they can then seed the word of mouth about it. And it's all... So I think it's very, very effective, and it's a very important celebration of the art of cinema and its impact on culture. The way most people can see it will be on Netflix, which is a good thing because we won't discriminate based on do you live in a big enough city, do you live in the right country. No, if you want to watch Roma on Street Date, you get to push play anywhere in the world and you'll get to watch it.
But to qualify for the Oscars, you do need theatrical release.
Yeah, the Oscar requirement is 24 hours in the theater, one theater in Los Angeles.
But you're not going to do that.
No, we'll be in, but we will be day and date, meaning the day it's on Netflix, it'll be in more than 100 theaters around the world, but the same day that it's on Netflix. And we'll do a couple of screenings, like we're doing with the festivals, to give some people early access. And some of that's geared for the Oscar people and the Oscar voters and all those kind of things. But for the vast majority of the population, we'll be able to see it at the same time.
But is this going to, do you anticipate any sort of problems with this? Because you release in theaters, let's say, 100 theaters for Roma. Every director wants to see their work on a big screen, right? Do you think more and more directors will then want that from Netflix?
Well, what I think is interesting is I think directors want their work to be seen. They want their work in the culture. They want to be talked about at the coffee shop. And the best way to do that is to take away all the barriers to seeing it. So by being able to put it in your home. And remember, people are watching on phones, but they're also watching on very big screens with great sound systems. Paul Greengrass, who did 22 July for us, he's thrilled that his movie's been seen. That if that movie came out through traditional channels, it would have played on half a dozen screens in New York and LA, and then if it caught fire, it would grow out and grow out and grow out, and a very small number of people would ever see that movie through that traditional means. And in the first week of that movie on Netflix, more than 10 million people saw it around the world. That's unheard of for a movie like this. This is a Norwegian movie with a great director, but every cast member, every member of the crew, all Norwegian. And so I don't think a Norwegian film has had that kind of reach in a week in the history of cinema. So Paul is over the moon, thrilled about it. And we had no conversations about, do I have enough screens or not? And what I worry about is the opposite, which is once you put these movies on the screens and it gets reported how many people saw it on this opening day, then the movie is forever judged by that opening day. And as you know...
Which is what happened with Carrie's film.
Yes, you're Beast of No Nation. We were on 30 screens, and Beast of No Nation is a very tough movie. This is not necessarily a date night movie. And so on Friday night, the box office comes out, and the per-screen averages on those 30 screens were pretty low. And every article about that movie from then on was that it failed at the box office.
Yeah, it makes a narrative.
Yes, and it was incredibly successful in every way imaginable. But when those movies come around, people said that the first sentence of every story about that movie was box office failure. and which is a crazy way to look at it. The other thing that's interesting that happens in the Academy Award hunt is that sometimes directors who've made movies who are competitive for the Oscar will speak very freely about not the movies, but speaking badly about our distribution model, which is really a way of them speaking badly about the movie, which is against the rules of the Academy. So it was very disturbing and disappointing to hear some directors who had films in the hunt this year talking badly about the Netflix distribution, because I believe it was their way of working around the rules of not negatively campaighning, which
Didn't
they do.
Spielberg say something about it shouldn't qualify? Netflix films shouldn't
Yes, he
qualify?
did. Yeah, and which again, they could change the rules, but our films qualify for the Academy Awards. It's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Right.
That Roma is eligible for every award at the Oscars this year, including Best Picture. So there's no asterisks, there's no technically qualified, which I think is the word he used. And it was an interesting way for him to talk badly about Mudbound, because he had a movie, The Post, that was also up for the Academy Award. So,
I have to
which I
ask,
think is a violation of the spirit and of the rules of the Academy, for sure. But I
do
do love Stephen, and I respect what he's saying, and he really loves cinema, and he loves going to the theater, and I share his passion. But I got to have a beautiful 3-hour lunch with him a few months ago, and we talked for the longest time, because we both spent time in Phoenix, Arizona, about seeing so many of the same movies at the same art house theater in Tempe, Arizona, which is incredibly nostalgic. So
I have to ask, how often do you go to a theater?
I would go more often. My wife has to get very excited to go. The last thing we saw in the theater was Crazy Rich Asians, which she loved.
So she makes the decisions.
Yeah, well, she's
On this one?
she often makes the decisions about what movies to go out to see. But
Ted, is it true that you only need 5 hours of sleep?
that's true. Probably, but ever since I was a kid, I've only slept like 5 hours a night. I feel like it's going to catch up one day. One day I'm going to say,
You'll just sleep for a few
I'll
years.
just sleep for a few years. But I do now. I do find myself. We were talking before we started about when I travel a lot, and one of the only ways I could do it is I could sleep on a plane really well.
So you talked about Arizona, where, like Quentin Tarantino, you also got your film education working in a video store.
True.
What's the most important thing you learned about storytelling watching all those films?
Probably, it was a real luxury working in a video store. I joke around about a video store in America today. That's like being a blacksmith. That's one of these jobs that just doesn't exist anymore. But it was the luxury of it was a video store would be empty all day, and we do all the business at the last 2 hours of the night. And we had every movie ever made pretty much on the shelf, so you could go and watch anything. And what I learned then, what I was exposed to, that I wouldn't have been in Phoenix, Arizona under any other circumstances, is I was exposed to great independent film and great foreign language films. That otherwise, there was one theater in Tempe, Arizona, which was, for me, it was very far. I had to get on a bus for like an hour and a half to get there. And, but otherwise, there was no way to see those movies. Those movies didn't, pre-home video, those movies didn't exist in Phoenix, Arizona. And I happened to be a journalism student and read out-of-town newspapers. So that's the only reason I knew that there was a Spike Lee or a John Sayles or a Kurosawa, for that matter. And so I started reading. So I got to see. So one day we'd say, "Let's watch all the Kurosawa movies today," and you'd have the opportunity to do that. So for me, working in the store was like a business class and a film class all wrapped up into one. And I just then developed this otherwise useless benefit of being able to remember things about movies that I should have been spending time trying to remember things about math in school, but I spent that mind space on movies instead.
So what's the most important thing in a story? What do you look for?
I think that it's the stakes. When people watch it, and I think they have to figure out. And sometimes, by the way, the stakes can seem very low, but be very powerful. I think most great movies are based on a betrayal, because I think that's what makes movies very universal. Everyone in life has experienced some form of a betrayal, and being able to tell that story, I think, is in a way that people get emotionally invested in it. So there's a familiarity to it, no matter how exotic it is. So that's the thing you look for. Like, there's other kind of just structurally ones, like, does it take too long to get to the payoff and all those things. But I find like I have almost unlimited patience for a great story. so I can watch a movie, that moves very slow, that plays out over a very long time, if it's really delivering on the story.
And last question, and I'll open it up to the audience. You've had an incredible career, Ted, from 2000 to now at Netflix,
Yeah.
18 years at Netflix. What do you think it is? Like, what's the one ability that has really helped you go this far? What is the talent that you have, or even an amazing habit that you have, apart from the 5 hours of sleep, which I'm really jealous of? What else do you do?
Well, one is, I think, is I'm a consumer. I'm a fan, and I think that really helps me a lot because I work a lot of hours. My team works a lot of hours, and the only way you could do that is that you have to enjoy it at some level, and I love it. And in fact, I will watch. I've told my son this. My son is 22 years old. He's a film student himself. He wants to be a film editor, and I told him that I had never left a movie theater. I'd never walked out of a movie, and he was shocked by this. I said, "What do you mean? Why would you leave a movie?" And he said, "Because every great movie ever made is on my phone in my pocket. Why would I sit through a bad movie?" And I told him, I said, "You know what? If you're sitting in a movie, that is the experience. So when I sit down in the theater with, like, you're sitting right now, I expect what's on the screen to be great, and I expect it all the way to the end. Sometimes I'm disappointed, but all the way through it, I'm waiting for the good thing. I'm waiting for that scene that catches my attention." There was a movie that I watch over and over again, Paul Newman movie called The Verdict. There's a very small performance in the movie. I can't remember the actress's name, but she comes into the courtroom and delivers her 3-minute scene on the stand. That every time I see it, it takes my breath away. To me, it's the thing that makes the movie is so memorable. But people who are younger have a very short attention span, and they must be entertained from frame one to the end. And it's interesting that my son said that, because what's great about what he does is he does watch those movies on his phone. He saw Clockwork Orange on his phone. He saw 2001 on his phone, and he didn't have. For him, it was no less of an experience than it was for me seeing it in the theater. So it's all just generational. So my thing that got me there, I think, is my actually love of the product itself, and if anything else, which is an extension of it, is my real adoration for directors and creators. I really think it's so admirable what they do, and I have a high tolerance for a lot of the other parts of getting something made, because I so appreciate and value the artist.
So in that sense, Ted, you're like us film critics, because we also go in with such optimism.
Yes.
And we always sort of think that the next one is going to be just incredible.
I'm a fan of your critique, and I am
thank you.
because I could tell when you write, you write it from a place of love of the work.
I do, and nobody gets that.
Yeah.
They're just so mad all the time.
Yes,
but it comes from a place of love.
Because you want it to be great.
Absolutely.
You want it to be great too. Yeah, and so I think that's different today too, because a lot of online criticism is about clickbait, and clickbait is great when it's angry. So a movie can't just be okay anymore. A critic has to say it's the worst movie ever, because people will click on that. Who's going to write an article saying this movie's okay? No one's going to click on that. So you have to, and some movies are just okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a place in the world for the okay movies too.
Yes, for sure.
I remember my daughter telling me once that she really had a great time watching a very dumb film, because after her exams, that's just what she needed.
Yes.
And that really taught me that all films have an audience.
That's absolutely true. And it's not just an audience, but every movie has an audience, and the audience has a mood. So sometimes you have some movies that I remember. There's some movies that there's a really I don't know the filmmaker. I don't want to insult him, but there's a movie that I remember being so funny when I saw it. It was called perfect. I just draw a complete blank on the movie too. But I just remember seeing it in high school and just thought it was the funniest thing ever. And then it just disappeared. It didn't. Oh, it's called The Hollywood Nights. That's the name of it.
Right.
Now it's a high school comedy, but and then it was never on video because the music rights were very expensive. So it just kind of disappeared for 20 years. And I was telling people for 20 years, this is the best movie ever made. It's so funny. And then it came out finally on DVD, and everyone's called me, is this the movie you've always been talking about? So at the time, it was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Okay, guys, who has question?
Has Netflix abandoned its Cannes dreams? Is that regulation about how long a film must play and then not get on a streaming platform, is that disappointing?
For the sake of the audience, last year, actually Roma, they passed a rule at the Cannes Film Festival that you couldn't be in the festival unless your film was going to play in the movie theaters in France. And the reason we couldn't play Roma in movie theaters in France is because they have another rule. There's a lot of rules in France. But they have another rule that if you play in a movie theater in France, you can't be on an online subscription service for 3 years. So if we put Roma in the theater to get it into the festival, we couldn't have put it on Netflix for our French customers for 3 years. And I thought that was a terrible trade-off to make for our customers and for Alfonso. So we pulled our films from Cannes and premiered them in Venice instead. And it was a disappointment for everybody. But actually, because of that, I think we were much more embraced in the fall festivals and got better positioned, I think, in the other festivals. I hope that Cannes, Terry, who runs Cannes and programs Cannes, is a real cinema lover. And this was a heartbreaking thing for him too. It was not his rule; it was the rule of his board, which is made up of movie exhibitors. So of course they would vote for a rule like that, and it had to be a unanimous vote. And I believe it was 8-2. So 2 people voted against us, and that's why the rule was in place. Like I said earlier, if the Cannes Film Festival is going to remain relevant, they have to program the best films made. And if we make the best films, then we'll get into Cannes. It may not be this year, maybe not next year, but eventually, if they are to continue to celebrate the art and be a relevant international festival, I think they have to.
Are you talking to Terry about, I mean, is there any movement for
Yes,
next year?
yeah, I just saw him. I just went to Lyon, France, to his festival and saw him there. And we talked, and they played Roma as well. He was thrilled to play Roma in his festival, and we continue to talk about it. We'd love to figure out a path to get the films into Cannes. It's a great experience, and it is an incredibly important festival and important to filmmakers. So that's why. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to reduce the cost of the service in India to increase your subscriber base?
So we always are trying to find. It's part of the consumer science of Netflix is try to figure out the right price value for every country, and a lot of it really is how much do you have to watch. The more you watch Netflix, it's not a price sensitivity as much as a value sensitivity. If you watch Netflix a couple hours a day, like a lot of people do around the world, the value is very high. If you casually drop in on a couple of episodes, the value may be lower to you. So what we really try to do is try to make the product more and more valuable to consumers by giving them more great, high-quality things to watch. And we're always trying to adjust the price to suit the market.
I just wanted to understand, we spoke a lot about Sacred Games, and it's a show that everybody loved. But Phantom Films, the one who produced it, it also found itself in the middle of a Me Too scandal that's currently sort of rocking the country. And even the festival has acknowledged it, and they did make some changes, which I thought was quite brave. I wanted to understand, Netflix released a statement saying that they conducted an internal inquiry. Are there sort of different moral guidelines when it comes to a case of assault in the US versus India? Because we did have a story that sort of spoke about how like a few members were complicit in covering it up, and it felt as if, you weren't holding an Indian story to the same standards you would hold an American one.
We held them to the exact same standard. And remember, every one of these cases is completely different. The circumstances are different, the individuals are different, the timetables are different. You should know that on a Netflix programming, we're committed to making sure that the workplace is safe and respectful always. We have instituted harassment training on all of our productions in India as the same exact program that we do in the US and everywhere in the world. And everybody from the top to the bottom of the production must go through it before we roll cameras. We conducted an investigation in this case. We determined that it was appropriate to move forward with Vikram and Anurag, and that's based on the conditions of this story only, and that has nothing to do with anything before or anything anywhere else. And we believe that based on the facts that they came out through this investigation, that was the appropriate response.
I mean, I read an article that the online might also get censored. So would you think that things would change at Netflix if projects were to be censored?
Yeah, I hope that as local regulators look at Netflix and other online options, they look at it as on-demand being different than linear or than broadcast, meaning that people kind of it's very proactive viewing. You choose to watch something, you're informed by what's the content that is in there, and you push play, and you shouldn't be very surprised by the content, as long as we're providing the tools to tell people what this story contains or what this material is. And it's different. So on demand is different from broadcast in that you don't just walk into the room and are not exposed to something you don't want to see. And we hope that that's part of any kind of censorship policy that goes out. To date, there's been very little censorship of the internet, and we self-regulate, meaning that we'll provide the tools and we self-regulate in terms of what we believe to be the local custom and the local sensitivity of the programming that we put on all over the world. So.
Okay, hi Anupama, hi Ted.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so my question to you is that on the digital platform is relatively new in India, and props to Netflix for coming up with opportunities, budgets, wonderful shows. So as a filmmaker, as an aspiring filmmaker, what advice would you give me if I have some concepts which I think would make into entertaining as well as good content? So how do I approach Netflix and how do I make them, believe
This is
that,
where you give out Eric's
That's
email.
right. I'm going to give Eric's email. His name is Eric Barmack, and his email is ebarmack, BEBARMACK, @netflix.com.
Yeah, so he's handling the projects for India.
Yes, he has a team here as well that oversees.
And as you said, you get 1,000 mails per day. Probably he gets 5,000 mails per
No,
day.
but he
So how would you-
answers. I can
answers.
attest to that. He answers.
Okay.
He's really amazing.
And,
He
and by the
answers
way,
it.
we'll develop
it-
as we
it-
have more and more presence in India. We'll develop better and more efficient ways to get like pitch days and those kind of things to get stories into our team.
Okay,
But right
can
now,
you
I
please-
feel like we're moving as fast as we can and
Right.
keeping the level of quality as high as we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, can you just please repeat the email?
It's ebarmack @netflix.com.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Ted, thank you so much. Such
Thank
a
you.
lovely conversation. Thank you. I
Thank
hope
you.
you enjoy Mumbai and MAMI.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.